Hi guys, so today I wanted to take just a few minutes to introduce you to one of the stories that you're reading, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So first of all, in this lesson, as you're going through both the listening to this PowerPoint and then reading the story and completing your discussion, I'm looking for you to complete the following learning outcomes. First, you will demonstrate competence in critical reading skills. Second, you will write using conventions of standard American English. And then finally, you will compose effective thesis statements directly related to given prompts, which that's moving a little bit further down the way, but it all kind of moves forward. All right, so where I want to start is by giving you background on Kate Chopin. First and foremost, you can find most of this information in your textbook, but to start with, Kate Chopin was born in 1850 to 1904, so she lived for about 54 years. She was of Creole Irish background, and her family was of high society. When I say high society, I mean that her family was well respected and wealthy within, and so they had influence within their community. Ultimately, though, her father died, so she was raised by women. Her mother and her aunts really took care of her grandmother, and we see this kind of manifest itself in Chopin's work because she looks at women as these strong figures. In 1870, she married Oscar Chopin, but then in 1884, after Oscar died, she began her literary career to support her and her six children. Again, we're seeing here this absence of a male figure and a woman having to take on the brunt of the household. Her works typically focus on female sexuality, female inequality, and the craving of independence. We see this over and over again in her work, where her characters are really looking to become independent and equal. And we see this as kind of an where Chopin grew up having all of these women raise her, and then she was a mother raising her children, supporting her family. We see her having this influence from her life on her work, where she is striving for her own independence, but she's also considering the role of marriage on the family and what this means for women. She was one of the first examples of modernism, which is evidenced in her use of perspective, point of view, craft, and the use of imagery. The Story of an Hour particularly really uses a lot of imagery, and that imagery is juxtaposed with what the character is feeling or what we believe the character should be feeling, so it brings out this great sense of irony. Chopin is credited with starting the modern feminist literature genre in America, which is kind of a big deal. There's always been feminist literature just from the get-go of literature, of women writing anyway, there's been feminist literature. But in the United States, Chopin was really credited with starting this. To provide you a little bit of historical background, feminist literature has been around since the 15th century. Again, it's been around for a long time. And this literature really seeks equality for women in social, political, economic, and civic status in relation to men. So we see these writers pointing out the fact that women are not necessarily provided the same sorts of advantages as men in all of these areas. In the late 1800s, Chopin's work led the charge in the feminist literary movement during a time where women were fighting for suffrage, economic, and social rights during the women's liberation movement. It really kind of just worked out nicely that Chopin came along when she did, because this was a time period that was really latent with these really strong female figures who were trying to gain the right to vote, were trying to have the ability to own property and work jobs and to have rights within society that were equal to those of their male counterparts. This movement is still active today. We have seen the recent women's marches in the last couple of years on Washington and then in our own locations. Just a couple of months ago in January, there was a women's march in Orlando. So this is definitely a movement that is still very much alive today. Again, we see this with the Time's Up and Me Too campaigns that are going on within Hollywood and throughout society right now. The story of an hour includes what we call an O. Henry ending, which is named for William Sidney Porter, who wrote under the pseudonym O. Henry, and whose work often included a surprise ending. When you get to the story of an hour, you will see that suddenly things end in a way that maybe we didn't see coming. Again, this is the O. Henry ending. It also explores the concept of the private self versus the public self. Who are we when we are alone versus who are we when we are among others? This is often these are often two different types of people. Just think about it in everyday life. Even in public, we are different versions of ourselves. For example, the person we are when we are around our family may look different than the type of person we are when we are around our friends versus the version of ourselves that we put forward when we're at work versus who we are when we're just alone, when we're just with our own personal thoughts and ideas. So we really see this explored in this particular story, the story of an hour. We will see our main character, Miss Mallard, Louise Mallard, when she's downstairs in public, she appears one way, and then when she goes upstairs into a room and she's by herself, she has a totally different revelation. This story really works to provide a commentary on marriage, suggesting that marriage forces both man and woman to impose their wills on each other. It's important that we note this piece, that it's not simply that marriage is a burden on a woman, but it's also a burden on a man, because when you are in a marriage, you are expecting the other person at times to bend to your will, and at times you have to bend to their will. But sometimes what happens in marriage is that one person bends all the time to the other person's will. And that's where I think it becomes particularly problematic. But this work is really looking at this bending of wills and how you're not really free when you're married, you're more trapped. And we can think about this on a really granular level when we think about if we've ever been in a relationship with somebody, whether that's a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, and they have wanted to go to a movie, but you didn't want to go to the movie. So your significant other wants to see the new Avengers movie, but you don't like superhero movies. But because you care about your significant other, they drag you to this movie anyway. That's really what we're seeing. This is, like I say, a really granular example. But anytime you've gone to a restaurant or to a movie or to a gathering that you didn't want to go to because someone that you had a close relationship with, whether it was a significant other or maybe a friend, when you do that, you are bending to the will of that other person. And Chopin's really looking at this in the constraints of marriage and what effect that has on the people within that marriage. All right, so that's all I have for you right now. I will be uploading another video in a few days after you have had the opportunity to complete the discussion to really talk through this story with you to give you a little further insight. If you have any questions, please inbox me, contact me during office hours. I definitely want to talk to you if you have questions.